This is a text that I brought if you are doing the Essential Texts class with me a few weeks ago, but it is one that is so very important to me I wanted to bring to the bigger group. It's a reflection on this mysterious interchange between God and Moses that wasn't in our triennial part of the Torah reading today. We read a third of the Torah every year, so that over the course of 3 years we read the entire Parsha. This wasn't in the part that we read today, but it was in Tisa. It describes a moment in which Moshe comes to God and says to God, if I am to lead this people, I need to understand you better. I want to know you on a more intimate level, if I'm to be your representative on earth. And God says back to Moshe, you can't know me entirely. No human being can know me entirely. And so you can't see my face, but I will show you my back. I won't show you all of me, but I will give you a powerful and profound sense of me. And God says, this is on your sheet, see, there's a place near me. Station yourself on the rock, and as my presence passes by, I will put you in the cleft of the rock and shield you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I'll take my hand away, and you can see my back, but my face must not be seen. So Moses gets a glimpse of ultimate reality, a glimpse of ultimate holiness, but not the full picture. And this has been the jumping off point for the Talmud. It's been a jumping off point for the commentators. It's certainly been a jumping off point for the Kabbalists, for the mystics, whose great interest is in getting as close to a vision of God's face as is possible. This morning, those of us who were here for the Torah study learned with Howard Mirowitz and the pieces of it that I could follow of your quantum analysis of this Torah portion, the idea that there are dimensions beyond dimensions that we don't perceive as human beings, that this is just the reality that from our limited vantage point, there is truth beyond what our brains will ever be able to take in. All we can get is a glimpse, is a sense of the bigger mystery. So this has been a jumping off point for commentators and mystics. But this particular commentary, which comes from Professor Arnold Ehrlich, has been an important text for me for many years since it was shared with me by my teacher, Rabbi Chaim Seidler-Feller, 40 years the rabbi of UCLA Hillel, who you've heard me reference before. And it really sits at the core of my Judaism, and I want to make sure to pass it on to you. What I see in these words, he writes, is reflected in the words of the German sage. And by the way, here he's using the word sage, not to describe a rabbinic sage, but a German secular philosopher, Gotthold Lessing, who wrote, if I were standing before God, and truth was held in God's right hand, and the search for truth in God's left hand, and God said, choose, I would choose the search for truth. One more time, if truth was in God's right hand, and the search for truth was in God's left hand, and God offered me the choice, I would choose the search. A similar teaching, he says, is found in the Mishnah, in the first collection of rabbinic writings. More precious is 1 hour in tshuva and mitzvot, in repentance and good deeds in this world, than in all the life to come. So much of Western religion is focused on the goal of getting you to heaven. Our job is to do the right thing here on earth, or believe the right thing here on earth, so that we can get into where it actually starts to matter, which is on the other side. The Mishnah says the opposite. Better to spend 1 hour in what you're supposed to do here than to focus on all of what is to come. Why? They taught this because one who arrives at the truth and attains eternity rests from their toil, since they've arrived at their destination. But one who strives towards something lofty and exalted, their effort is more rewarding than the reward itself. Better to do the work than to get the reward, because the effort is actually where all the fun is. So too is it with regard to the knowledge of God. For if a human being attains the highest level, above which there is none, what will they do afterwards? If you've learned everything there is to know, if you've achieved the greatest level of enlightenment, if you have reached nirvana, then what are you going to do? How boring to be enlightened. What a drag to be at total one with God. There's nothing left to do. Therefore, no human being can see God's face, and God reveals only God's back to the devout, in order that they continually search and probe, drawing inferences with regards to God's face from observing God's back, and toiling all their life to know God in the most complete and clear manner. Their toil is their reward. It's not the destination, folks. It's the journey. It's the journey. The fun of it is in the questions. The meat of it is in the searching. It's not about reaching the ultimate destination, about achieving a total awareness as though such a thing were possible. It's about taking joy in the process of searching and taking pride in putting one step ahead of another, in inching closer and closer to a truth that we know we can never fully wrap our arms around, but is worthy of a lifetime's effort. I want to invite, if there are a couple of reactions to this text, thoughts that you have as you read this or think about it, how it applies for your own life, how it applies for your Jewish and spiritual life. I would love for us to have a few minutes of discussion. Yeah.
It's describing the life of a musician in that if you don't enjoy practicing, you're doomed. And that's been the joy of my life. It's sitting at home and trying to get better at what I do. And it's all about the journey. You know, for a long time I started out as a guitar player. I started out as a clarinet player, then moved to guitar. But for a long time, I was an electric bass player. And I made a good living of that when I moved to Los Angeles. But I never loved practicing the instrument because the electric bass, it's just not that much fun to play unless you're in a band. And when you're in a band, it's a groove. But sitting around by myself, so I never got great at the electric bass because I didn't enjoy the journey as much, the day-to-day journey. But guitar and clarinet, that was a different story. I just loved the sound of it, and I loved the journey.
And isn't that true of any artistic practice? I mean, I clearly know nothing about being a musician, but of any artistic practice, right? The point of being an artist is to constantly be pushing against one's limits, knowing that there is further to go, and knowing that you're never going to arrive. That no matter how beautiful of a painting you produce, no matter what extraordinary piece of music you produce, no matter what brilliant poem or novel you write, there's always something out there which is better. And there's always a striving to try to reach for that. That's where great art comes from, is by pushing against our limits. Other reflections, Pat?
Okay, the thought just occurred to me that Moshe asking God to see him face to face was to understand where all this was going, what he was doing, what the people were doing, where this was going to go. He wanted to see the end. But God said, no, you're not going to see the end, because if you see it now, you'll change it.
Part of what's exciting about being a human being is that we don't know how the story's going to end. Right? That's scary, and that's frustrating. It would be nice to know, but part of being a human being is having those infinite possibilities in front of us, and that keeps us on the journey. Francine.
I'm kind of all over the place with my thoughts on this, but I saw Everything Everywhere All at Once this week. and that, like, there's so many alternate realities and so many paths that our lives could take us on, and we don't know which one is the right path. We just have to be there and live it, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around all of this, but somehow I think that all fits in Search for the Bagel.
Yeah. Are there other voices?
This sort of reminds me of some discussions I had in college, usually at 4 a.m. and in various states of sobriety. But I was thinking about the answer to the question might depend on what stage of life you're at. So say, for example, you knew with utter certainty that you were going to die tomorrow. I think at that point, you'd want to know the truth, especially if it was something which was beyond your capacity to understand, because your ability to journey was at an end. Just a little thought. Stage of life may determine what the proper answer is.
No, they're kind of, to me, reality is all about what's changing, as you said. It's even in like physics or math. You don't need to think about what makes something stay the same as it is. Every bit of information that we ever create has to do with how it changes into the next step, right? And at the end, we actually all do know what's going to happen, right? Our life ends. But after that happens, all you can say is, we don't know, right? There's no way we can know. And the key thing is even time stops when nothing's happening. Because in order to know that time's passing, something has to happen, like the hand on the clock has to move. We don't know anything about time without some energy happening to cause an event and another event. So that everything stops unless you're changing.
Which means that we're never going to get there. We're just going to keep inching. I want to bring it together, and I want to invite this as a conversation over lunch. I see some more hands, which is great. This is the start of a conversation. I want to suggest one additional framing in this. I want to suggest that this is not actually so different than love, not just between us and God, but between us and another human being. We are not knowable in our entirety. We're not knowable even to ourselves in our entirety. It doesn't matter how much therapy you pay for. There's always more mysteries. And if we're not knowable to ourselves in our entirety, then we are certainly never knowable to another person in our entirety, nor are they knowable to us. What love is committing to another human being to say, I am endlessly curious to keep getting to know you. I am endlessly curious to keep discovering more and more facets of who you are in the world, knowing that I will never exhaust them all. And I am willing to be vulnerable to allow myself to be known more and more with each passing day. That's how we relate to each other in love. We relate to each other with boundless curiosity. And that's, I think, the invitation that Professor Ehrlich is offering us in how we relate to God. Knowing that we are never going to know the whole picture. We are never going to decode every mystery. And knowing that that's okay. If we can't even know ourselves or our partners, how are we to know the master of the universe in God's entirety? But that we're endlessly curious. And that each day is a good day if it inches us just a little bit closer to connection to that greatest and most inviting of mysteries. Shabbat Shalom.